Dr. Ralph Chami is currently Assistant Director and Chief of Financial Policies Division in the Institute for Capacity Development at International Monetary Fund. He developed the internal training curriculum for IMF economists as well as revamped the external training curriculum of member countries. Between 2009 and 2014, he oversaw the Regional Studies Division covering 32 countries in the Middle East and the Central Asia departments, and the Mission and Division Chief for Fragile States such as Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Sudan, South Sudan, and Somalia. He is the recipient of the prestigious 2014 IMF Operational Excellency Award for his fieldwork on the fragile states. His book, Macroeconomic Policies in Fragile States, co-edited with Raphael and Peter, was published by Oxford University Press in March 2021. Before joining IMF, Ralph was on the faculty of Finance Department at the University of Notre Dame, USA. Ralph has a BS from American University of Beirut and an MBA in Finance and Statistics from the University of Kansas and a PhD in Economics from Johns Hopkins University. His area of expertise include fragile and conflicted affected states, climate change, remittance, migration, financial market, and banking. Additionally, Ralph has done the very much revolutionary and extraordinary work on valuing the nature to help the nature. He is also the guitar player, yoga practitioner, and a mesmerizing storyteller. With this short bio, I would like to request Dr. Ralph Chami to give his keynote address and enlighten all of us.
Thank you, Dr. Manish. With this billing, I'm like, I can only live it down, so I'll try my best. I'd like to share my screen, please. Let me know if you're able to. Okay. So good morning, everyone. Good evening. It's morning on my side. It's about 7 a.m. Good afternoon. Good evening to all. I'd like to thank Dr. Manish, Dr. Anil, IIT, and NDIM for the wonderful invite to talk about a subject that is dear to my heart, and I think a very timely subject at that. So I would like to share my presentation with you, if you don't mind. Please let me know when you're able to see it. Okay, can you see the presentation?
Yes, sir, it's visible.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. So what I'd like to talk about is the value of nature to our well-being, of course, our health, but also to our economic prosperity. And I'm a storyteller, so I would like to tell you a story, and but I would like to start from the end of the story, and then build the story towards the end. So this is a story that has a very happy ending. It's going to end with a new paradigm. I call that paradigm the win-win model. And in this new ending, we're going to really have economic prosperity that is sustainable, that is inclusive, and that is nature friendly, because this new paradigm has at its core nature in its DNA. So this is, in case you're bored and you want to leave the lecture, this is it. This is the end. This is where we're going to end up. Now, what I have to do is build the story for you and convince you that that is so. Okay, now here's the sharp contrast with what we are dealing with. I could not agree more with Dr. Deepak about the relationship between sustainable development and a sustainable ecosystem. In fact, this is precisely where I left off, is the current model in which we're operating. If you notice, views that the economy is separate from nature. Now, we don't have the time, unfortunately, to go through how we ended up this way, but the current model views that somehow the economy is separate from nature. Nature is external to us. And that's why when I was taught economics and I taught economics myself, we look at activities within the economy and then how the economy causes, externalities, spillovers into nature. Because we're external to nature, we think we're external to nature. You can imagine that this circle that is signifying the economy can grow independent of the size of nature or the bounds of nature through technology, if you like. And so our relationship with nature has been quite on the extractive side, meaning we think nature is limitless. We think nature is boundless, limitless, and is free. So we can extract with impunity, we can pollute with impunity. And as a result, we've imposed a risk on nature called, now we call it the natural capital risk. Basically, the natural world is dying around us. Of course, nature, has the ecosystem services and biodiversity. And when you inflict such pain on nature, nature also reminds us that we are really, that this paradigm is really not the right one. So it sends us back messages through, if you like, natural disasters, through pandemics, and what we call the, unfortunately, climate change risk. So this is the current model, which I think is bankrupt, to say the least, and has caused so much harm to us and to the world in which we live. So so the current paradigm, as you can see, is, I call it the win-lose model. We win, nature loses. Of course, that's not the end of the story, because now we're feeling the pain of it. It comes back with something called COVID or SARS or avian flu. And in this case, this terrible pandemic that is upon all of us, losses in the millions of people, in deaths, and many more pushed back into destitution, and the losses of growth to the global economy and so forth. But really what I want you to focus on is the hard lesson here, that nature is critical. It's critical to our well-being, we know that, but it's also critical to our economies. We like to, since I work in a macro institution, we call it macro critical. Now, this is a proposition. Of course, we all feel it, every day. But the question is, how do we build this? How do we really make it part of the economy if it is really macro critical? Well, we have to start with, what does science tell us? We need to be fact-based. So we go to science. Science in the last decade or so tells us incredible things. Tells us, for example, that the oceans are the lungs of the earth, the lungs of the planet. After all, 4/5 of the planet is water. We seem to forget that because we are land-based people. And we hardly know about the land on which we preside, let alone in the oceans that we know so little about. And that's why we're able to pollute. We pollute the oceans with impunity and kill everything that breathes in it. Anyway, so in the oceans live these microscopic organisms called the phytoplankton. These are the things that are in green here. And they do something incredible, just like any living plant. It takes in carbon dioxide. Some believe that about 30% of all carbon dioxide that is emitted, and returns something beautiful back to us, which is oxygen. And in some circles, scientific circles, they believe that's over 50% of the oxygen is due to these phytoplankton in the ocean, which means every other breath that you and I take, you should be thanking a phytoplankton for that. If you like to visualize how important they are equivalent to, in terms of their ability to capture carbon dioxide, to 4 Amazon forests per year. That's how much is the flow. If you like, in gigatons, that's 37 gigatons of carbon dioxide being absorbed by the phytoplankton. Science also tells us that in these oceans live these wonderful creatures. This is Science circa 2010, Andy Pershing's first paper, discovered that these great whales, they're whales and they're great whales, there are 9 species of great whales, very big creatures, and they do something very interesting. We are all carbon units after all, but because of their volume and their size, they capture so much carbon on their body And because they are so heavy, when they perish, they sink. They're negatively buoyant. So they sink to the bottom of the ocean. And because they are not interacting with the atmosphere, that carbon does not become carbon dioxide. So it's sequestered. We call it sequestration. It's sequestered at the bottom of the ocean for many, 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 many years. And if you were to, as economists like to always think, what on average do the great whales capture in terms of carbon? It's about 9 tons of carbon, which is, if you multiply by 11/3, that's about 33 tons of carbon dioxide that is being kept out of the atmosphere just on the body of these creatures. And that, if you like to compare it to trees, that's about 1,500 trees, okay, being carried on the body of a single great whale. But it turns out that these great whales do something really fascinating. This is work of Joe Roman and others that came after Andy Pershing, and they discovered something called the whale pump. So these great whales, they feed on something very, very, very small called the krill. And the krill also feed on something. So I want you to visualize in your mind sort of like a triangle. And think of the base of the triangle. The whales, they eat the krill, so draw like a line from the whales to the krill. Now, the next arm of that triangle, the krill needs to feed on something. It feeds on the phytoplankton, which I just explained to you captures so much carbon dioxide. So that's the second arm of the triangle. Now, the phytoplankton, for it to prosper, to survive and do well, it needs nitrogen, phosphorus, and iron. Now, in many places, those come from runoffs of rivers or movement of wind over land. But in many parts of the ocean, you can't find either. So the phytoplankton, where do they find all these nutrients? And they find them in the fecal plumes of these great whales. So what these great whales do, they come close to the top and they release their fecal plumes. And their fecal plumes in Antarctica are rich in the limiting factor, which is iron, and in the Atlantic, and phosphorus and nitrogen. And so what they're really doing, they're fertilizing the phytoplankton. In fact, there's a scientific paper calls them the great fertilizers. So they fertilize their own food. They fertilize phyto. There's more phyto, there's more krill. And this is the virtuous cycle. And of course, these great whales, as they dive back up and down, they move nutrients in the ocean up and down. And there's other work by Joe Roman and others that talks about what's called the belt, because as they move from one body of water to the other, they're also releasing urine and other things and fertilizing things along the way as they move through the body of water. So from our perspective, if one were to ask how much does a whale contribute to carbon capture and sequestration through it directly its body and indirectly through its fertilization of the phytoplankton, turns out that one whale is equivalent, can capture thousands of carbon dioxide equivalent to thousands of trees. That's in the water. But the whales also have cousins on land, another keystone species, that they do something incredible. This is a recent paper by Fabio Berzaghi and colleagues published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal. And they're the first to basically find out that these are the elephants in Central Africa. So they're in the forest. They're not the savanna elephants. They're the cousins of the savanna elephants. They do something really incredible. As they walk around, as they move around the forest and they forage and through their movement and through their foraging, they thin out the forest. So they in a sense, they eat up the young shoots or destroy them, giving more space, more nutrients, more light, more rain for the older trees. As a result, that movement, that interaction causes more carbon to be sequestered in topsoil, which means in the bark and in the leaves of these trees, to the extent that one elephant over its lifetime can capture over 9,500 tons of carbon dioxide in the forest. In terms of percentage, these elephants are responsible for increasing carbon sequestration in the forests of Africa by at least 7%. And they also, in their study, they also show that the loss of these elephants has also caused the loss of carbon sequestration in these forests. So Here's another species now. Not only trees capture carbon, but species that are helping to sequester carbon in the forests. If you'd like to go to other bodies or organism or natural assets, here's an example of salt marshes. And this is just an example because we also know of mangroves, of seagrass, and other bodies in the water that also help to capture carbon. This is an example of a study that we had done. Salt marshes capture about 5 metric tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per year. But they also are an incredible defense against floods. They're natural defense against floods. And when you don't have those, you find that countries have, when we've lost those, they have to build seawalls, which are incredibly expensive to build and or to maintain. They also help with healthy fish stocks, and they also provide tourism services. So what is this really telling us? This is really telling us that biodiversity is valuable. It's something we know innately, but somehow we really need the science to tell us what we already know. That I want to underscore this, a living whale is incredibly valuable to us. Now, let me say something at the outset. All life is valuable. All life is intrinsically priceless. Here, my focus is really on ecosystem services to humanity. So over and beyond the intrinsic value of life, we're asking the question, how does nature affect our life, our health, and our economic systems? What I just showed you is in terms of just carbon itself, which is right now an obsession of all of humanity, how to reduce carbon and so forth. Well, it turns out that the living whale is incredibly valuable. But the whale is part of a biodiversity because the whale interacts with the krill and interacts with phytoplankton, and I'm sure multitudes of other organisms in the water. Same thing with the living elephant. The elephant, as it walks around and defecates and so forth, is also has value. A living elephant, a living forest, captures carbon, keeps the soil together and so forth. A living salt marsh, a living mangrove, peatlands, wetlands, all of these are living. Nature is valuable not only intrinsically, but also to our livelihood. Yet, here's the conundrum, especially for me as an economist, right? Although science is telling us nature is valuable to us, but a market value of the ecosystem service of a living whale is zero. I mean, how can that be? Price should be derived from value. We just showed that a value of a whale is valuable to us in terms of the carbon sequestration, but it also adds to livestock, to fish stocks, and it also provides for whale tourism. But somehow the price of a living whale is zero. Meaning, if right now a ship were to strike a whale and kill it, there's no price, there's no penalty, has no value in the market system. But kill that whale, chop it to pieces, and feed it in countries where they still eat whale meat, a dead whale acquires a value of between 40,000 and 80,000, depending on the size of that whale. Same thing with the elephant. A living elephant, I just showed you, this is work of Fabio Berzaghi and colleagues, are telling us, well, these elephants, these forest elephants are incredibly valuable, if only in carbon. I'm sure they do other things, but just in carbon itself, they're incredibly valuable to us. Yet a living elephant has no value, has no market value yet. But poach an elephant and sell its tusks, and a dead elephant fetches between 10,000 and 40,000 for its ivory, if it's a trophy hunt. So what's really missing here? Something is not right. How can the price should come from value? How come something so valuable has a zero price in our market system? Okay. The problem is the following, is the benefits that we've been talking about of nature have stayed in the world, in the realm of science. Whereas we live in an economic sphere. Our language is language of dollars and cents. The science language is not of dollars and cents. When we talk about nature, we talk about ecosystem services, we talk about biodiversity. So what really is, according, my understanding of this is that there's a translation problem. We need, what we're failing to do is, up until now, I hope, is translate the benefits of the of nature into the language of that our economies can understand. So if it's really a translation problem, well, let's try to translate the nature's benefits into a language. Let's reinterpret nature's benefits into a language that us that live in the economic world can understand. Because when you do that, then you are able to compare apples and apples and oranges and oranges. That way you can engage policymakers in financial markets who only think in cost-benefit analysis, who think in dollars and cents. They don't think of ecosystem services and biodiversity and beauty of nature. So, but in order to do so, we need to first understand what is the science telling us, and then we need to translate that knowledge into financial knowledge, financial language, and we do that by placing a market value on these ecosystem services. But notice what's going to happen when you do so. This is what's going to happen, is you end up in the correct paradigm, because what I really described to you up until now is that nature is valuable to us. Okay, and nature is in fact not external to us as what the current model would like us to think. Nature is the home in where we live, where we reside. Okay? I'm talking to you today from my home, from my house. I have a roof over my head, which keeps the rain from coming in. I have walls that keep the wind from coming in. And it's the home from which I'm doing my presentation. So our economies live in nature. Okay, Dr. Deepak just mentioned it, which is, I fully agree with that. So we are not separate from nature. Nature affects us directly, not indirectly. Nature is not an externality. Okay, but what was happening is, in this world that we are in, we created something called market systems with dollars and cents and rupees or what have you, the numeraire that you want to work with. But nature does not understand that language. Nature is nature, biosystems, ecosystems. So somehow we need to take this here, which is part of nature, and convert it into dollars and cents, so we can make sense of how we fit inside nature. And also nature, as I drew this circle, is not limitless, and it's not boundless, it's not limitless, and it's not free. Obviously, we can assign a dollar amount to it. So why don't we go ahead and do so? Well, here's what we did. We said, let's look at what does a whale provide in terms of ecosystem services to us. Now, the focus here is one, what do we know about what whales are doing, and what is it that we can measure? Because we know about whales are doing a lot of things, but the question is, how many of these benefits we can really measure? And when I talk about measure, I'm talking about things that have a market and have a price. Because whales do a lot of other things for which markets don't yet exist, and there is no price. So that's why we only focus on three things when we did the original study, was to focus on the carbon sequestration. We looked at impact of whales on fish stocks, and we looked at whale tourism. And the study, I'm just going to describe it very briefly, is the way you do it is whales live, different species live different, for different periods of time. Some whales live over 100 years, some whales live less than 100 years, and so forth. So we took whales that live 60 years. And during its lifetime, when it reaches adulthood, it gives birth to babies. Some of them survive, some of them don't survive. And then you track the whales over their lifetime. So you're looking at overlapping generations over 150 years. And you take it all out, and then you bring it back to the present, and you ask yourself, how much is the ecosystem services of a single whale worth to us in dollars today? And what we came up with was a minimum of 2 million. By the way, when we did the 2 million, the price of carbon, a metric ton of carbon on the European exchange was $24.17. If you look at today's price, it's about $57. So you can imagine that the value of the ecosystem of this whale has just basically went from $24 to $57. Same thing we did with the study that Fabio and his colleagues had done. We looked at the elephant contribution over its lifetime, 60 years of elephant life. Elephant gives birth to babies, and some of them survive, some of them don't survive, and you take that and you follow that generation over 100 and 150 years. And then you calculate the capitalized value of a single elephant, and that value is $1.75 million just in carbon sequestration alone. Of course, the elephants do other things that are also valuable, but this is just the carbon side. We can do the same thing with the salt marshes. We looked at the salt marsh carbon sequestration service, and we looked at its flood control service. And that these two alone, we didn't even look at impact on fish stocks or on tourism. The value of a hectare of salt marsh is about $140,000. And again, that was done when the price of carbon was really $24 per metric ton. So what we're really saying here in the language of market economies in which we live, that we found new wealth. This wealth was always there, as I showed you in that circle, but was invisible to us because it was existing in a different language. Once you translate it into our language, suddenly this wealth becomes visible to us. And we like to call it natural assets because I'm a financial economist. So if you like to call it natural treasure, that's also fine too, or national treasure. But just because the science tells us it's valuable, and just because we've been able to value its services, doesn't mean that nature is not under threat, is out of danger. In fact, just the opposite. Okay, the IUCN very recently put these elephants that I just talked about on the extinction list, meaning those elephants in the next decade will become extinct if we don't do something, and we don't do something now. Okay, these are examples of how nature, the natural world in which we live, the home that protects us, is dying on our watch. So then if the science is not enough and the valuation is not enough, what is it that we need? Well, we need policy. We need policy because if something is valuable to us and we are now able to do the cost benefit analysis, if we're able to say that a living whale is worth over 2 million, but a dead whale is worth 40,000, what are we doing? Why aren't we protecting and having more whales? Because they are providing services that are so valuable to us. And the same thing applies to the elephants, marshes, salt marshes, seagrass, mangroves, and so forth, because we need policy. And when I talk about policy, if something is valuable to us, we should declare it valuable to us. If it's a national treasure, we should say, this is a national treasure. This is something, we codify it in the law, and we have a value already for it. And basically, I'm summarizing this by calling, we need the legal rights of nature. And then when something is valuable, of course, you want to monitor it. And if any harm is done to it, you want to enforce the penalty. But we also want to build markets around. We want to bring people, we want to bring all the stakeholders around nature. So we need to create incentives to engage with the rest of humanity. Here are some examples, just a few examples to give you of countries that have already moved ahead with this. Now imagine this in New Zealand. They have conferred personhood on the rivers. Imagine that a river now in New Zealand has the rights of any human, and everybody else has responsibilities towards it. If any harm is done to it, there will be penalties, could be civil, could be criminal. And here are other examples of other countries that have done so. Okay? So what I've described now is we have the science, we have the valuation, we need the policy. Because if we are able to call what is valuable in our language, then we can start to really build economies around it. Otherwise, it's all talk. So what do we really need to do? If somebody were to ask me, we need to codify it in the law. We need to codify it in the law, because once you call an asset, you codify it in the law, could be all the laws that already exist. That means you've endowed it with priority, with durability, and with convertibility. These are all the characteristics of an asset, and that asset becomes capital. So all this talk about natural capital is not going to happen through the invisible hand of the market. It's going to happen through the visible hand of the governments in question. Okay? This is how you move from invisible, from the natural asset to the natural capital. When you have that, then you're going to start what happens is when something is declared an asset and codified in the law becomes capital, then the markets start to look at it as an asset. And then the markets come in to build an economy around the protection and regeneration of nature. But by doing so, you're creating PPPs, you're creating local employment, you're encouraging community ownership, and you're also helping the economies of many of these countries to move away from selling a primary product to actually diversifying their economy by investing in their natural assets. Here are two simple examples that we are working on. I shouldn't say simple, actually, they're beautiful examples. Here's a project that's underway right now in Chile, the Blue Boat Initiative. This is a national project now in Chile, where they are installing buoys in the Gulf of Corcovado. The Chileans have long realized the importance of their blue whales to their economy. And as a result, what they've done, they're trying to protect the whales in an effective way. And what they're doing is they're using the latest technology to do so. So the Blue Boat Initiative is meant to protect the whales and monitor the oceans in the sense to address the climate risk. Let's all remind ourselves that COP25, the presidency of COP25 was the Chileans had that presidency, and they're the ones who pushed to make the oceans, rather than just victims of acidification, but also that the ocean is a key factor in fighting climate change. So what they've done, they installed buoys in the water, and this buoy is very interesting. It has a chip in it. It can discern, it can figure out what species of whale is in the water. It can tell you whether it's a fin whale, whether it's a right whale, whether it's a humpback, whether it's a blue whale, at what location, at what depth. So this is brand new technology. And then that information is beamed to a satellite. And that satellite beams it to a land base center, where that signal is sent to the ship saying, watch out, you have a blue whale in your way at this location, at this depth. Now, if you tell me, how do we take this idea of the importance of nature to our economic systems, and we build our economy around it? Here's an example that could come from Gabon. Gabon has 50% of all of the elephants that are left in the wild in Africa, 45,000, and they are in 19 protected forests. Okay, so what you have are these elephants. And of course, they're also susceptible to poaching, and they're increasing carbon in the forest. So this is a project that we are actually, an experiment we did ourselves. If you look at you have 45,000 elephants, just the current stock of these elephants, in terms of their contribution to the above ground carbon, it's worth about $20 billion. Just imagine that. But the stock of 45,000 elephants also give birth to babies. So the additionality that would come from having these babies survive will add another $11 billion. So one is a stock, one is a flow. And you can basically say that the value of elephant carbon to the economy of Gabon is $32 billion minimum. Now, how do you make this operational? Well, we're all now looking at Paris Climate Accords. We're all trying to abide by the accord, and we're saying we're going to go carbon zero, carbon neutral, or carbon negative. And so the demand for carbon is skyrocketing. That's why the price of carbon is actually going up. So countries have made commitments to meet the carbon zero or carbon neutrality. And if you happen to be domiciled in that country, that means you as a firm have to also go carbon zero, carbon neutral, which means Gabon, in principle, could sell the services of these elephants, not the elephants. You don't sell the asset. The asset has to remain free, to roam freely, because that's how the elephant helps to sequester carbon in the forest, by living its life. But by doing it's just what it does, it's helping to sequester carbon. We can measure that carbon and we can sell it. So basically, you go to, let's say, just for the sake of the example, you go to Microsoft and you say to Microsoft, well, you need to offset your carbon footprint, right? Yes. Well, we can sell you, well, how much do you need to offset? Well, this much. Okay, so we can sell you the services of some elephants that we have, and you pay us for that, and you get the offset. But Microsoft gets more than the offset, gets to invest in Mother Nature, gets to be an equity partner with us in the protection of these elephants in perpetuity. What do local communities get? Well, they go from having to poach because they're destitute, because no one aspires to be a poacher. Poaching is the last resort of a desperate person trying to make a living. So they get meaningful employment, meaningful income, steady income in perpetuity, and they get the benefit of a living nature and a better environment. This is the new paradigm that I'm really talking about. So you may ask me, well, why now? Why, Ralph, are you talking about it now? Why couldn't we talk about this before? Well, because now because climate calamity is upon us. If we were having this conversation, 5 or 10 years ago, some of us would be listening. Most of us won't be, because we were reeling from the 2008 financial crisis, so no one was listening to anything. Because right now it's an obsession of everybody. It's the climate change is here. So on the demand side, you have an insatiable demand for carbon offsets, how to sequester carbon, how to take it out of well, the question for us is, how are you going to do it, right? You have two ways of dealing with carbon. You have the technology way, I call it, high tech, versus you also have what a colleague of mine likes to call it earth tech. Earth, meaning in the natural world, says, why don't you try me first? Because at least I am, I've been around for millions of years. I've been looking after you for millions of years. These are the ecosystem services. I can help you with that supply. Of course, we need technology, but technology by itself is not going to be enough. We need the natural world around us. Technology gives us the incorrect impression that we can live outside of nature, whereas when we invest in nature and harness the power of nature to help us solve the climate crisis, then we become, all of us, equity holders in our Mother Earth. So you have a demand for carbon sequestration because of the commitments to carbon neutrality. We need to get the supply going. We need to create the markets around nature. And of course, what also different is technology. I just showed you state-of-the-art technology. We have now the technology to track the elephants in the forests. We have the technology to track the whales, and have technology to count things from space, and through all kinds of sensors that we did not have before. That's what's different now. And finally, when we do all of this, we arrive at the final chapter with which I started the story. Basically, it's a very simple thing, as Professor Deepak said it before, it's a recognition really of what we already knew, what native cultures already knew, that the sustainability of our economic system and the sustainability of our livelihood depends on the sustainability of the ecosystem and biodiversity. We can harness this understanding through the creation of markets for services of living nature. And this, in my opinion, is what's going to lead to prosperity that is shared, that is sustainable, and that is nature friendly by design. And just I want to leave you with this. We are like the prodigal son, if you like. We went out we lost our way, and now we need to come home. We need to come home to the only home we'll ever know, which is our planet. We need to understand that, but hopefully we come back a much better, much more educated, much more, a little bit wiser, and we live in balance with nature and live really in prosperity and sustainability for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ralph, for an excellent presentation. I think we need to understand the language of nature. It's a translation problem that you mentioned. The benefit of the nature that economy understand, we need to take that to the account. And wow, whale services are worth of $2 million, while the dead whale is only $40,000. Same thing with elephants. Wow, it's eye-opening story. Amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay. So now the floor is open to the questions. Dr. Ralph, can we take a few questions?
Of course, I'll be delighted.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Professor, giving an excellent talk. It is eye-open to all the members and the scientists here. And nature is our treasure, as you said, actually. A lot of people do not know as much Goel said it. And we should inform a lot of people working in the rural areas and everything. They should understand what is the importance of nature, actually. Now time has come. We have to inform to the colleges and universities, and importance of nature has to be highlighted in different places in the world. Thank you, Professor.
You. And in fact, you know, I taught in business schools, and I would love to go back and be able to take all these very smart, you know, these smart young people and say, let's take these techniques that you've learned and let's apply them.
Yes.
Let's apply them in a way that you feel good too by doing it. You know, you want to make money, that's fine. What I'm trying to show you is this is a win-win model. Nature wins, you win. Countries, by the way, a corollary of this work is many poor countries are going to discover that their backyard is full of treasure. All you have to do is look in your backyard and you discover the peatlands and the wetlands and the marshes and this, all of these are incredibly valuable, you know, and they're valuable in perpetuity. In perpetuity, it's a regenerative approach to nature rather than the current model of extract. And when you extract, it's one time. One time you take things, you know, we kill things, we take it out, right? And it's lost forever. This paradigm is a regenerative paradigm. So I would advise, I mean, I would love to encourage my colleagues in the schools to go back to all these young people that are so smart and appeal to their imagination and say, look, we want you now to focus all this on taking this model, this paradigm, and work it through, because we're just scratching the tip. We're just scratching the tip.
Hello, Dr. Chami. This is Raghu from Monash. Nice to hear such a delighting presentation. Thanks a lot. Frankly speaking, it gave me a new vision and a new way of looking at ecosystem. I work in ecosystem, but not the way you told. I'm really delighted with that. One small clarification. It's not a question. I know you are an expert in this field. Just wanted to know your opinion. You have now used the whales and elephants for this presentation. Do you also see how it can be extrapolated to other wildlife? Let's not reserve to wildlife, maybe some geo resources as well, as you can look at it. Just, I want to know your opinion. Thanks for that.
And thank you for this question. Indeed. I mean, notice how we're doing this. The science is informing us. The science, as the discoveries are being made, all we're doing, we are translating the benefits in the science into the language of the policymakers, and the financial markets. So do I think that it only stops with the keystone species of the elephants and the, of course not. I am sure that we're going to discover that every organism on this planet is valuable. You know, Earth is one breath. Earth is a living being. It takes one breath, and we all fit within that one breath. But the human brain, the way it works, it takes snapshots, right? It takes snapshots. So we're doing slices, and we see the elephants doing this. We see the whales doing this. But even the whale itself does a lot more. I spent 4 years studying the blue whale. I used to travel to Sea of Cortez and be with the blue whales. And when a blue whale is feeding, by the way, a blue whale could be, 30 meters long, right? Imagine this magnificent being, and you are in a 25-foot boat next to it. And this majestic being that is larger than any creature that ever lived is feeding gently next to you. She knows you're there. She knows you are there. Okay, and just to give you an example of how large these beings are. You can fit an African elephant inside the mouth of a blue whale. It would disappear completely. Okay, just the mouth of a blue whale. So when a blue whale is feeding, what do you observe? You observe the dolphins are feeding, the birds are feeding, all kinds of fishes are feeding. It's a whole ecosystem. Now, when we did this study, I recall a famous scientist with me on a panel said to me, but Ralph, the krill is very important. The krill is dying, and the krill is what feeds the whales. So what is the value of a krill? This is an answer to your question. That's something we'd love to do. But let me explain to you why we did what we did. I come from the markets. For the longest time, conservationists spoke among themselves. So we were proselytizing to the converts. And we kept out of this equation the policymakers, the investors, the financial markets where all the resources are sitting. We either demonized them or we told them, you don't understand the beauty of nature. And they said, fine, we don't understand. You don't want to keep us, you don't want to bring us inside the tent. You want us to stay outside the tent, do it. So we stayed inside the tent and we give high fives to each other and we feel good. Nature is important and we go home. And what's happening? Nature is dying. We need resources. We need everybody inside the tent. And we need to hold hands together and solve the problem together, because only together can we solve the problem. Now, why am I telling you this? Because when we wrote our papers, we wrote it not for the converts. We wrote it to my crowd. My crowd, I called it the what's in it for me crowd. This is the crowd that says, unless it touches me, I don't really care. I'm sorry to say that, but that's true. So I was talking to them saying, even if you live in Nebraska, okay, landlocked, you'll never go to the ocean. But this wonderful creature in the ocean has been looking after you, giving you the life that you're breathing, be it the phytoplankton or be it the. So we were putting it in the language to bring everybody inside the tent, to be inclusive in the solution. So I'm sorry taking a long time to answer your question, which is very important. Do we think there are more out there? But of course, that's why part of the effort to bring resources into this is to fund you guys, the science guys, the research guys, because we need you to go out there and discover the mystery of life, the mysteries that are still out there, which is far more than what we've discovered. And I'm sure we're going to find out that the lions, by the way, the lions are dying. You can ask me the question, do the lions have value? Of course they have value. I mean, what did they discover when they returned the wolves? Why did they make an effort in the US to bring back the wolves? They discovered that the presence of the wolves in the national park kept the herbivores from overgrazing. Because when the wolf is present, the deer cannot eat all the time. It has to look up and to see whether the wolf is there or not. So that keeping it from sitting the whole day and eating protected from overgrazing, protected the rivers from overflowing, because around the banks there are all these herbivores eating the whole time, wearing down the soil, and the river would overflow. So by having the predator there, it kept the herbivore from overgrazing, which kept the banks healthier. We are all connected. We're going to discover soon, I'm sure, that there are other wonders out there, and then they will come to us. I'm just the interpreter, and they say, can you interpret the science for us, please, in the language that our colleagues, the policymaker. I lived at the IMF for 23 years. It's dollars and cents. If you talk to them in bio terms, they would listen to you. You know, they're nice people, but they cannot relate to you. You have to speak the language that they understand, right? When I'm in your country, if I want to make an impact, I need to speak in the language that people of India would understand. If I aim to engage, if you want to engage successfully, and that's what we're doing. We need to engage successfully with all the stakeholders in this society, global society, if we are to make a difference, while we still have time, because time is running. People, I just want to remind everyone that when we talk about 2050 or 2040 or 2030, this is not it. This is not a fixed point in space. I mean, in you know, that you can touch, feel. This is a point in time, and time is dynamic, and time is a train coming at you at light speed. So if we don't move yesterday, the 2050 date becomes 2040. If we don't move yesterday, 2040 becomes 2030. If you would like to see how close 2030 is to us, calculate for yourself, because you need government action. How many days is the government going to work between now and 2030? Remove the holidays and the weekends and all these things, and you'll find out. I did it for the US and I got scared because I realized there's not much time left to act.
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question.
Please, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I want to say first, thank you for introducing us to such a fantastic concept. I was not aware of this. I'm not an environmental scientist, but I'm very happy to know that I always worried the nature, but how are we going to make the people also understand that it is important for survival of a human race? You see, because most of the people understand only the money part of it, right? So
Yes.
now the way you have introduced it, it seems feasible that we can also reach out to the people and make them understand and participate, increase their participation in this kind of endeavor. So I want to know what kind of policies are being made at international level regarding this.
So thank you so much for the question. I will not do right by this question completely, but I'll just say that the world is now aware that we've reached the tipping point. And what you're seeing is all kinds of efforts around it. A recognition, by the way, just to let me clarify something. There are two risks here. Two risks. They're interlinked, but they're also separate. There's a climate change risk, and there's a natural world risk. And the two are linked. But you have to understand the politicians live in the world of climate change. You, Professor, you live in the world of science and the natural capital.
Right.
And so what we need to do, we need to link the two. That's why when we wrote our papers, we strategically put ourselves in the middle. Because if we don't do that, here's my worry, here's my concern. If you just focus on the climate change, then somebody, a well-meaning person will come along and says, I have this wonderful technology that will capture carbon for you from the atmosphere. So you pay me and I offset. Now, suppose that technology exists. Does that stop the elephants from dying? No. Does that stop the whales from dying? Because the whales are dying from ship strikes, from sonar systems, from being caught in fishing nets, right? From plastics, from pollution. So so if we just focus on the climate side, and again take a pill called technology, we are not part. Again, we are divorcing ourselves from the natural world from which we came, where we belong, our home. And we do that at our own peril, because nature will exist no matter what, as you know very well, in one form or another. And if you want to prove of my claim, take a look at there's a live camera that shows you Chernobyl right now and today. You can log on to it and watch it. Chernobyl, you know, this this accident that happened in Russia. Okay, now what do you observe if you look at that camera? Nature is back. It covers all the buildings. Animals are back. Who's missing from the picture? We are missing from the picture. So this is the story of us. When we talk about climate change, it's the story of us. It's about us. We are at the brink of extinction. Yes, we're going to take with us a lot of species, but Earth, one way or another, will survive it. But we won't. We won't. So what's happening is there's a recognition now by politicians. Recognition. The scientists always knew that, but they had no way of conveying that warning to the rest of us, because they spoke a language that the rest of us didn't understand. Correct. And what we're simply doing here is taking that language and translating it into the language that policymakers, because the other thing that scientists don't understand, if I go into a room, by the way, everything I'm telling you, I've gone through it. You go into a room and you make presentation about the value of a salt marsh, okay, to a policymaker. So you say, the policymaker is going to ask you the following question, or the person with the budget is going to say, yes, how can I help you? You'll say, well, we need to protect the salt marsh. Yes, how much is this going to cost me? That we understand very well. Conservation, the cost of conservation, we understand very well. How much is this going to cost me? You say, so many rupees. Okay, what do I get in return? What do I get in return? And the scientist starts talking about, well, you get ecosystem services, you get biodiversity. That person sitting behind the desk is a lawyer, is an economist, is a finance, is a marketing person, doesn't understand what you're talking about. Now, out of courtesy, out of your stature, he's going to listen to the conversation, but can't wait for you to leave the room because somebody else is waiting to come in. That somebody else is going to come in and say, look, if we get rid of the salt marshes, we can build you a marina. That marina is going to bring you so much income. So many yachts by these rich folks are going to be parked there. You're going to get tourists, you're going to get this, so many dollars. So the guy now does the cost-benefit analysis in 5 minutes. How much does it cost me to get rid of these salt marshes? What is the benefit of the marina? And we're done. You've lost. So I knew that because I was asked by someone to do exactly this. That's how I know, because I was in that room listening to that conversation. What you want to do is the following. You want to walk into the policymakers and say, we need to protect mangroves or peatlands or wetlands. And the person with the decision making is going to say, what's the cost? You say X dollars or rupees or what have you, and says, what do I get in return? You get Y rupees, and Y is greater than X. And Y is not some number that is based on some survey of households. Be careful. I'm a market economist, so I came from the markets. I used markets that exist, prices that exist. So I didn't want investors to tell me, where do you come up with that price? So when I was discussing people that have worked on natural capital, they said, but you know, these systems produce a lot more ecosystem services. I said, true, but we have no market price for them yet. Why is that important? Because the investor is not going to invest based on a survey. They're going to base it on what is the price? Where do you come up with that price? What's your metric? Where do I find your metric? Where do I go? Where do I read it? You see? So I'm sorry, I'm taking your answer more fully. The whole world is working on it right now. Do we need the IFIs to do something? Yes. The most important thing is to declare there's a theorem in public economics. We all know something called we all know about the problem of the public good, which is the free riding aspect of it, or tragedy of the commons, if you like. If you want to solve that problem, what you want is to localize the benefit of the public good.
Very true.
So if you localize it, then you own it.
Right.
That's another that comes out of the economics.
The participation will be there.
Exactly. So the local communities, Exactly. So the local communities, conservation becomes sustainable when the local community itself understands it and finds value in it. Not when I fly in from Washington, D.C., proselytize to them about the wonders of nature, then get back on my plane and go home, and the guy sitting, the elephant is coming into my yard, destroying my vegetation. What is this guy talking about? This guy from the IMF, what's he talking about? Okay, that doesn't work. What I have to do is I have to bring the benefit to his door or her door and say, this elephant, through its work in the forest, is providing you the life that you're breathing right now. And I'm going to make it concrete for you. You look after that elephant for your own sake. So there's part of it, part of this effort is outreach. We need outreach. We need education, as some of you already mentioned. And then we may have to make it localized. Conservation is sustainable when it's localized, not when it's proselytized.
Thank you.
The farmer himself, herself, has to see the value from protecting the trees. Otherwise, they'll cut it down and sell it for wood because they need to eat. But if you were to tell them, keep that tree alive, I will sell its services, not the tree. We don't sell the tree ever.
The concept is really workable. So that's
yes.
what.
Yes. All we need is to, if it says, there's an expression in the US, we say, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it looks like a duck, it's a duck. We just have to call it what it is. If it's a natural asset, call it a natural asset. And we have values for it. And once that you do, trust me, businesses will come in very quickly. And I can give you examples, concrete examples of it actually this would work. I'll stop here.
This is going to be a very, very interesting discussion. and we are running out of the time. So we can take last question. We can take one last question. Yeah.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
Dr. Chami, this is Michael.
Yes, hello, Michael.
Yes. First of all, I would like to congratulate you for this wonderful talk. I am a student of biodiversity conservation, and I have been hearing about the payment for ecosystem services and how the payment comes into as an alternative solution for to conserve biodiversity. We all know quantification of biodiversity or quantification of or valuation of ecosystem has been there for quite some time. Now, my question to you is, you have beautifully explained how the markets or the finance can help in conserving or furthering the biodiversity conservation. How it can help local economies, how it can help in our conservation efforts. But now the question is, why the national governments, particularly in global south or in developing countries, have not made it as a mainstream biodiversity conservation policy?
Thank you for this question. It's a matter of knowledge. It's a matter of information, and showing the way. So part of our effort is to tell people, do you know? This idea of biodiversity, as you know, you're the scientists and the students of science, you know about this, you've known about this. Like when I found out about this, I was on a trip studying the blue whale, and I discovered that Andy Pershing had written the paper on it in academic journals in 2010. And I kept, and my background is in physics, and my first degree is in sciences. And I'm like, how is it that I didn't know about this? So local, let's give, my mom used to say, let's give the absentee the excuse. They didn't know about it. They didn't know about the importance of the ecosystem to our own economies. They didn't know about it. So part of our effort is to inform. But once you inform, then the next question becomes, so science tells you it's important. The valuation says, here's how important it is in dollar terms. Then you're going to ask me the question, I think your question is, how do we get local governments to act on this? You have to call the asset an asset. You have to declare it an asset. Now, why am I telling you this? I'm not an environmental economist. I'm a financial economist. I taught corporate finance. I know a lot about corporate finance and assets. Assets exist. Do you know why? Not because of invisible hand, as we were taught, because of the visible hand of the government. Every asset that you know of, whether it be your home, your house, your contract, your mortgage-backed security, CDOs, CDSs, are there because they were codified in the law. And for them to be codified in the law, they needed the visible hand of the state, meaning the state had to see that this asset can bring revenue to it. Only then it allows it to be codified in the law. Only then the asset becomes capital that you put on your balance sheet. And here we're talking about the natural capital, which means you need the state interjection to bring this natural asset, which belongs to the state in most cases, to become a natural capital. Otherwise, I just do the valuation for you. The science tells us this, and we cannot get to the market. If I allow me just a few minutes, I'll explain to you just how this would work, just so that you visibly see it. I told you about the Blue Boat Initiative in Chile. So now let's assume, this is hypothetical, they know where the whales are, right? So this new buoy, which exists, can tell you there's a whale in this as the tanker is coming. Here's a whale at this depth at this location. Now let me ask you the following question: do you think the captain of that ship is going to stop if he knows there's a whale? Exactly. The answer, as one of our colleagues already said, no, because this guy has been stuck in the Suez Canal for 7 weeks while they were trying to move that ship, and he's late to delivery. So the fact that he knows that there's a whale in his way is not getting to stop. How will he stop? Here's how. Suppose the government, where those whales exist, declares the whale a national treasure. I did the valuation with my colleagues for the whales in Chile. It's for the great whales, a minimum of $3 million per whale. Suppose they declare them a national treasure, and they say, based on this scientific work, it's $3 million if you hit my whale, if you injure a whale. Now, let's repeat the experiment. The tanker is coming, and the whale is in its way. Will the tanker stop? Well, it depends. Is the tanker insured against hitting the whale? Right? So what's going to happen is Lloyd's of London, for example, that insures the tanker, is going to say, wait a minute, when I wrote you that maritime contract, I did not know there was an asset in the water that had value of 3 million that you may damage. So I'm going to put now a line in the contract, an addendum that says you are not insured against this damage. So now you are on your own. If you hit that whale, you are going to pay the government $3 million, the owner of the tanker. You see, what you've done is the insurance company is coming in now saying, wait a minute, this is a new asset. We didn't know it existed. But it only comes in because the government has declared it so. Now, of course, the story doesn't end here, because what's going to happen next is the owner of the tanker doesn't want to hit the whale, doesn't want to pay, and says, look, man, can I put anything on my ship that would keep me from hitting the whale? I say, yes. There's these very bright IT guys in India who've come up with this system you put on your ship that will identify where the whale is. And if you put that on your ship, then I will insure you at a premium. You've brought in now the insurance company into the fold. The owner of the tanker puts the thing on the ship, and because by the way, those buoys can monitor those ships, can tell where the ships are, and you have satellites, so you can actually figure out if you're going to hit or not. The technology is moving very quickly, but what I've described to you is how the business start to take things seriously once the government takes action and says, this is an asset. Mortgage-backed securities exist because they're codified in the law. When they're codified in the law, they're endowed with 4 things. Any asset becomes a capital because it's endowed with something called priority, durability, universality, and convertibility. Every asset that you and I know of that we trade on the markets have these characteristics. And they're only there by an act of law. The government allowed it to be because the government could see that it could benefit from it, from future cash flows, be it tax, be it fees, be it whatever have you. Not because of the invisible hand, because of the very visible hand of the government. So that's what we need. Now, I'm going to end this because I know we're late. I've been at the IMF for 23 years. I've been on the ground as a mission chief, division chief, negotiated all kinds of things. I'm a researcher, as you probably know. I still publish papers. I would like to write a paper with one line. If you want action, you need political will. We know enough to act. My dear mother used to say, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We know enough to act. What are we waiting for? How can you go wrong by betting on nature? Can you explain to me? I mean, how can this go wrong? To have more nature, when is that can be bad? But the other proposition can see the demise of the human race. So we need to act. We have enough studies, and we can. Science is never perfect. Science is cumulative by nature. We'll build on each other's knowledge. So, but what we know enough now is to act. So let's do it, and let's do it all together.